So, hello? You hear me? Yes? Okay. I don't know if Frederick is already online. Maybe we can show him somewhere. Yeah,
Yep,
Frederick
yep.
is there. Okay.
Here we have him.
So thank you very much. We continue with the session. We had a very nice, inspiring talk before the coffee break, and she was talking in a very optimistic way about the uses of technology, right? Now we will be talking from the research part. We are mostly AI researchers. We produce the scientific elements that will produce that technology. And what we want to use this knowledge to provoke some questions regarding how AI should be addressed by the politicians and decision makers in order to bring, in an appropriate way, this technology to education, all levels of education, not only the regular education, but also informal education. That is also important. So the panelists are Liliana Arroyo, that she's Director General for Digital Society at the Generalitat of Catalunya. Then we have Frederick Heinz somewhere. That he is Professor of Computer Science at Linköping University in Sweden. He's the director of the Wallenberg Transformative Technologies Education Development Program. It's a very interesting foundation that puts around 500 million euros, a private fund, to promote artificial intelligence in Sweden. Something very important. And he's also the coordinator of Taylor, that is one of the largest networks of excellence in the European Union for Horizon 2020, and that's devoted on the teaching of artificial intelligence. And he's also one of the members of the EuroAI board, so that's the board that is collectively bringing the research of artificial intelligence in the whole Europe. And then Luis Magdalena, that he's a professor of artificial intelligence at Universidad Politécnica de Madrid. He's also vice president for technical activities at the Computational Intelligence Society, IEEE, and he's vice president of the Spanish Association for Artificial Intelligence, right? So, made the presentations, we go to the thing. So, Liliana, artificial intelligence is quickly reshaping public policy, the economy, and education. I would love to hear from you your insights concerning how we might guarantee that developing AI-based systems in education adheres to the ethical, legal, socio-economical, cultural, and maybe gender principles of the European Union, and upholds student privacy and data protection regulations.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for all the audience which is here with us today. And I will try to answer this inspiring question in 7 minutes, so I will be checking my phone. Okay. But yeah, I think that this is a very crucial question, because I think that innovation needs to be value-driven, not only data-driven, which is something that we are quite used to here. So my insights here today come from both my experience as a sociologist, so from the social science and the focus on the social impact of technological innovation, but also 1 year ago I took office in the Catalan government, so I can share some insights from what can we do and what we cannot do at the administration. So I have like two main basic disclaimers at the beginning, and then I will organize my speech and my proposal for a holistic approach on how can we govern all this innovation in three big boxes, like the macro, meso, and micro. So the first question, because we know that we are many principles available and many, many frameworks. One is the one that you presented before, but we also have the UNESCO one, the OECD one. Also at the European level, we have guidelines with toolkits and so on and so forth. So it's not a lack of principles, it's the need to enact all these principles and to enforce all these frameworks. So the first thing that we need to ask is who is responsible at each stage of learning and educating, and then offer tools according to the responsibility. And I will explain it further in a minute. And the second thing is, which are the principles that we cannot avoid, regardless if it's AI or it's blockchain or whatever, quantum technologies or whatever technological innovation that is coming. I think that the most important thing is that we cannot lose focus, that it needs to be human-centered. And when I say human, means that we need to place the needs at the center of the discussion. In this case, the needs of the learners, in particular for those that are underage, but also the principles of agency, autonomy, dignity, and of course, digital rights. Okay? With these two things in mind, then I move forward, and I can come across some ideas of what can we do at the macro, meso, and micro levels. And given that we need a holistic approach and that evil is in the details sometimes, the micro part is super important. But I will start with the macro. So at the macro level, of course, all the frameworks that we have been mentioning agree that we need to set up a governance and to set up stewardship, not only for data, but also for the development of the tools. This governance needs to be, of course, multi-stakeholder, okay? And we need international cooperation. This is something that we cannot avoid at all terms, because if there's no international cooperation, there will be always loopholes. The principles that are important, but as I was saying at the beginning, we need mechanisms to enforce these principles, to enforce compliance. Because out of the simple positive will, there's only a portion that will apply these principles, but we need to force the industry to be compliant with this. And on the administration side, I would say that we have a very powerful tool, which is public procurement. Innovative public procurement, it's a good avenue to change things at the macro level. And afterwards, if I have time, I will share a couple of experiences that we have at Generalitat. So these are the macro, very, very ambitious level at the macro level, and when I think about macro, it's in global terms, okay? Then we have the meso space, which is the organizational domain, right? And here we have schools, we have education centers, we have non-formal education spaces, and so on. But this is only the demand side. We also have the supply side, which is developers, but also institutions that are educating those who are going to be developing solutions. So it's important that we have, for both demand and supply sides, communities of practice that have these frameworks and these principles as reference, where they can test, where they can play, they can explain what works, what it's not working, and that research and practice, it's connected. So this idea of building communities of practice, it's also a way to offer support, not only peer support, but also multi-stakeholder support, which at the end of the day will be fostering the macro mechanisms that we were mentioning before. And last but not the least, we go to the individual level, which is the micro level. As I said, the evil is in the details. Imagine that we have an international governance, which is fantastic, it's in place and it's enforced. Imagine that we have these communities of practice, but imagine that individuals with their practices and their day-to-day experiences, they don't have idea on how to enforce this, on how to practice this, how to make it reality. Then we will be losing most probably in those most vulnerable sectors of the population, because they will be the less able to deploy this. So at this point, I think that it's important to remember that we are currently in the year of digital skills. So 2023 is the European Year of Skills. So digital skills for educators, learners, and every single person which is a role model in the learning system and education system, but also offering guidelines, examples, use cases, inspiration, toolkits, any kind of guidance, support, mentoring, and peer-to-peer gatherings. I think it's important. I'm not sure if I still have 1 minute. Maybe we can close here.
Yeah,
I will share the experiences afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Frederick, from your different positions of responsibility, you've been following the impact of artificial intelligence in education and digital skills. So, I would love you to answer this question. As the use of AI-based systems disrupts education, what should we prioritize in this transformation? And additionally, what potential pitfalls can be cautious of? Did you hear that?
Thank you very much, Ulysses, for the question. I would really like to be there in person. Unfortunately, that was not possible, but I'm very grateful to get this opportunity to address you from on a distance. So first of all, I think it's very interesting to realize that, we see that there's been a lot of developments in AI and that it's really having a broad and deep impact on education. I usually use this example of these large language models. And as you probably are aware, they have now been done studies where they compare or look at how do these language models do on examination. And one example I often use is from a British law degree, where they basically came to the conclusion that GPT-4 was better than the average student on this lawyer's program. And of course, this is not people in general, but it's people that have been selected and admitted to this probably highly competitive program. And still, GPT-4 is better than the average student on this program. What are the consequences of that? And actually, I think the first interesting observation is that I would be surprised if anyone would be willing to hire GPT-4 as their lawyer, which means that there are obviously things that we as humans contribute that is not provided by these systems. And actually, my first reflection here is that I think that what we examine in our university and education in general is probably not the most valuable and interesting skills and knowledges. So for me, the short-term effect is probably that we need to rethink how we examine students at all levels. And the second, I think it's the long-term impact. Because, my expectation is that we will be using this, for example, the large language models as tools in our everyday job. And actually, I think we will not even notice it explicitly because it will be built into every tool that we use. If we're using a word processing tool, or we're using an email tool, or we're using a web browser, or whatever it is, it will be built in, providing very sophisticated support for us, which means that I don't think this is really optional, but rather something that everyone will be using. And of course, this begs the question, how does this change what we need to educate in? And actually, I think the big kind of macro perspective there is that traditionally, education has been very much around answering well-defined questions. So you get an exam with questions, and then you're supposed to formulate answers to this, and it doesn't really matter if it's math questions or social science questions or history questions or whatever. It's very much focused on answering questions. And actually, I think here we can see a potential very big change in the fact that now these AI-based tools are really good at answering questions, but someone still needs to ask the appropriate questions and critically examining the answers that you get back. Because of course we cannot trust what, for example, ChatGPT produces. So we know that it is often incorrect and it cannot do all things, but I would still argue it's very useful. But to be useful, we really need to ask the right questions, provide appropriate context in which the answer should be produced, and then critically examining and improving and in some sense validating the results or the answers we get back. So actually I think this would be a fundamental shift in the focus of education, to rather focus on asking questions and examining the answers. And actually you can ask yourself, who is doing that today? It's the teachers. So basically that is the role of the teacher traditionally. So here I think we could have a fundamental shift. I think the second major, I mean, in some sense the third, I mean, if the first major consequence is examination, and when it comes to examination, I would say that probably we'll move away from this kind of summative examination at the end of a course or an end of some kind of education, and rather focus on formative examination, where you follow the process and how the students are developing over time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is really this shifting focus from answering questions to asking questions, critically examining the answers. And then the third aspect is really that I think AI will have an impact on all other subjects, which means that traditionally AI has been a subject within, say, the computer science, engineering, and so on and so forth. But now I expect basically every profession and every discipline to need to know sufficiently about AI, and of course how it impacts their particular discipline or profession. Here I really see a major challenge. Ulysses, you mentioned this WASP-Ed program that I'm the program director for. And basically the whole purpose of this program is to work at the national level in Sweden to help universities and higher education institutions to deal with this transformative effect of AI on higher education. And I think that really the difficult part, I mean, one part is increasing the volumes, but that I think is relatively well known in some sense. But the really hard part is how do we teach, and what should we teach related to AI in all the other subjects? And how do we get acceptance from the lawyers, the medical doctors, the HR specialists, the economists, the historians, and so on and so forth, that they also need to know about this? And what do they need to know? That I think is the third and really exciting challenge. And actually here we have a number of projects related to what we call AI literacy. So this is then trying to understand what do everyone need to know about AI in order to be a critical citizen in a society where AI is a major, or is one important aspect to be aware of. And this I think is both interesting and of course challenging in itself. Another thing that we're doing in WASP-Ed is that we're trying to have a better understanding of what does AI today mean. What is this broader subject which now touches upon the ethical, legal, economical, societal aspects, and not only the technical. So what we're trying to do is to define an AI curriculum in a very broad sense, which then covers these new aspects that so far hasn't been that pronounced. So I think that are some of my observations. When it comes to the pitfalls, one thing I see quite often is this, that AI is still seen mainly or only as a technical subject. So then, you have to get it into more technical programs. And actually I think that's, to me, a pitfall, that this is not just a technical subject, but it's actually something that influences all aspects of education. And I would say that maybe the social sciences or civics and so on, I mean, talking about democracy, talking about media, and all these areas, their AI already have a huge impact. And if we miss all of those, then I think we would be in trouble. I think that the second kind of pitfall is this seeing that it's either AI or humans, because I really believe it's AI and humans together, and that we complement each other. And the point is not to replace people, but rather to complement and empower people to be able to solve more challenging problems and deal with all the complexities in our modern day society. So I really think that's another pitfall. So to conclude, I mean, I am very positive when it comes to the development of AI in general, but I also think it's absolutely crucial that we take this educational aspect seriously and that we really address this. How does it influence examination? How does it influence what we should teach? And how do we make sure that everyone in society have a decent understanding of what AI is, so that we humans, together with AI as a tool, can really address the complex challenges that we are facing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Luis, the last but not the least, we have seen through leaders raise alarms about risks of the boom in artificial intelligence. My question is, how can we guarantee that implementing AI-based systems in education is fair, is clear, comprehensible to students, educators, and parents?
Well, thank you, Ulises, and thank you, everybody. I think it is a quite important question. We have been talking about the macro, the meso, and the micro levels. We are talking now about the micro levels, so at the lower level of capillarity in the system, though that will apply, but will suffer also the application. So I think it's quite important to consider that at present we have many declarations, many documents talking about why needing artificial intelligence in education, but all of them are written at a really high level. So the goals are inclusive, equity, ubiquitous. That's great, but I cannot tell a parent that has to do something with the kid because education will be ubiquitous. We have to learn to define goals at the ground level. All documents are talking at a really high level. We have to go to the ground. We have to transfer the ideas to convince people about what will be. The question is, why should I do that? Well, we have to show you the reasons for that, but not reasons at the level of humanity. Reasons at the level of your education, of your future, things like that. So I think that's quite important. We have to define tangible effects of this change. And in addition, as said by Ulises at the beginning, we have to be careful. Those of us that are familiar with AI, if we analyze where are let's say, the evidence about the effect of applying AI in education, I think that all the analyses are quite optimistic. There is no reason for other things, but most of them are not, let's say, properly deployed. There is not tangible effect that has been measured. So it is important. All of us that have been working in AI for many years, we know how much it is important to manage the expectation. Managing the expectation is a key aspect of any new technology. If you promise too much, there will be a problem at the end, even if you do quite well, but you are not arriving to the promises. So we have to be sure defining appropriate goals at the level of the language of those that will need to consider to upset, and being careful in not putting the goal too long, too far, not measuring in 15 years. That is one of the promises of education. Where will the effort be sensible? In 10, in 15 years? That's a problem. If we make the wrong decision, measurement will arrive after we lose a complete generation. So that's something to be careful with that. And not only from the point of view of the student, I think that that's also quite important from the point of view of the teacher. That's quite important. Most of us who are at university has experienced the COVID. And the COVID is a perfect test bed for any change in education. Because from one day to the other, everything changed. I think everywhere, not only at the university, but in many other places, even at the schools and professionals. We needed to change from online, presential, on Blackboard classes to virtual, remote, on tablet with the slides classes. And that's a strong change. And it's a strong change not only for the teachers, for the students, for the parents that were at the same time trying to work remotely and trying to connect the children to the university or to the school because was unable to do that. So we have to be careful with that because in my feeling at the university, being of a certain age, I have seen around me many people that has retired quite before the usual age because of COVID. Not because of the COVID itself, because of the situation that was produced. They were afraid about that. Many people feel it like outlier. And not only that, many people feel it like outlaw, because was not following the instructions, because it was impossible to do. So if we try to introduce a new technology, and this is a completely new technology, if we try to introduce a tool, we have to help those that has to implement to be able to do. We have to train. We have to have a supporting structure. We have people from audiovisual systems. We should have people from AI support if we want to put support to support our professors teaching with this kind of tool. So that's quite important. We have to be careful on not being too fast and trying to go too far too early. So there are many tools there. So we have to make the decisions consciously. And that's quite important also related to artificial intelligence. This is one of the points, but I think there are other questions, other important questions. We have to left room for AI-free parts inside the education system. Not everybody is AI. In the same way that at present not everybody are computers at the classrooms, there are classes without computers. We have to left room for AI-free elements. Why? Because we need people to be able to behave by themselves. We want them to have the critical thinking, to be able to analyze what the machine is doing. This is a tool. We all know that this tool is good, but also has some strong weaknesses. We have to teach about what are the weaknesses. You have to be ready for that. Imagine that we train our pilots only on autopilot. You will take a plane where the pilot has only been trained on autopilot? I don't think so. They need to know that the autopilot is great, but there is a manual piloting also, and that's important. Every skill you don't use will fade, will disappear. If they don't write, we'll lose the writing. If they don't think, we'll lose the thinking. I use, for example, I'm a math professor, and I use from time to time, I remember when I was a kid, there was this exercise of arithmetical test, speed test, with the kids. Now, from time to time at school, when teaching mathematics, I ask my students to do the arithmetical operations by mind. Why? I say, those are our anti-Alzheimer pills. Why? Because we have to train our mind. If you don't train, we'll disappear. So we have to be careful, not putting everywhere, not putting at any price, not putting too fast. We have to take the time to decide where, why, and explain clearly where and why, and help those that has to implement. Because if not, we are in a problem. Because at the end, the system will break. And will break either at the side of the student or at the side of the teacher, or even at the side of the parents that also are, in some cases, quite worried about this new technology that comes home and I have to help my kid. That's impossible. So we have to train everybody and to be ready to slow down if needed, because this is a great tool, but will need time to be useful and in the full practice to be operational.
Well, thank you very much. You already advanced a bit the next part. So now I want to close this session calling to an action and asking you for recommendations for the decision makers. So, yeah. Liliana, how can we do without augmenting the use of technology without augmenting the digital gap in society?
Thank you. That's a crucial question, and I will give my response as a decision maker that's trying to move things forward. So one of the responses, I think that Toyo also mentioned it's co-creation. So bearing in mind that the digital gap, it's not only the gap in terms of access to connectivity or devices, it's also in terms of knowledge gap, understanding, having the context to understand the impacts and so on. And this is very profound, and I think that it's the focus that we need to work the most. And we have in place a program against the digital divide in terms of training and building capacities for elderly people, but also for people in vulnerable situations. So one thing is training, which Luis was also mentioning. Once people is trained, they can co-create. They can be invited to co-create. They can be invited to have a voice, to have a say. And I think that it's particularly important when we think in terms of diversity. We have already talked about the importance of including more women in the development teams and transdisciplinarity and so on and so forth, but also to put the main characters of their daily lives on the table. So this means inviting unpaired people. This means inviting people who is living under the poverty threshold and so on, and asking for them what kind of technology, what kind of innovation is working for them, and which are the problems that they can face on a daily basis. Also inviting people underage, like those who have here behind us. So inviting them, because they also need to have a say, because they are living today and they will live in the world of tomorrow. So they need to have a say on that. And another thing we're trying to push forward is to try to push public procurement towards an inclusive perspective as well. And one of the experiments we have on the table at the moment is to gather experts, but also daily life experts, as I say, to help us to write the public procurement documents. So the technology is not only hired by the administrations out of the idea and the promises of the industry, but also based on the needs and putting people at the center.
Okay, thank you. Frederick, Luis already advances his idea about introduction, adapting and adopting technologies. So I want to hear your opinion regarding this introduction, adoption of this technology that is not driven by the government, but by the companies. And I believe that there is a great danger for democracy when a big company that is asymmetrical in power and is not following even the local standards for creation of these technologies is bringing them and producing the attraction that they have. So what do you think?
So, I mean, yes, I think when it comes to this aspect of having a small number of very companies that is producing the technology, I agree that that's a danger, and it's a risk in many aspects. I mean, in some sense, from my point of view, I think that the most important part is that these. I mean, if you take a large language model, which I assume you are referring to as an example, we know that implicit in this model, based on how you train them, on what data you train them, and so on, it will have an influence on the result, which means that the values will be implicit in this, which means that I think it's crucial that we in Europe develop our own language models that are sensitive and take our values into consideration, so that we are not basing our education on, say, American values or other countries, but we really retain our own. So yes, I agree with that. But I had another comment regarding this with speed, because I think speed is a major challenge here. So on the one hand, I can see the kind of wisdom in moving slowly. But at the same time, what we see is that the surrounding and society is moving much faster than, say, what education is doing. And then I think there will be a major discrepancy. And of course, there will always be those, say, that get support from their parents or peers or whatever, that learn to use the technology. But I really think we have to take the compensatory role of education very, very seriously. And I think if our, let's say, primary education and kind of public education system is not adopting this technology, I think the difference between both what you use in your kind of everyday life and what you get used in school will be too different. But I also think we will see a greater divide between those that know how to effectively use the technology and those that do not. So therefore, I actually think it's imperative that education at all levels actually actively experiment and try to find constructive ways of doing this, which means that yes, we will not know in advance exactly what the outcomes will be, and yes, we will make mistakes along the way, but that's the only way to learn how to do this in a good way. If we just say, oh, well, first we have to do the research, now we have to do all this well-designed studies, it will just take too long, and we will risk generations that would then not learn sufficiently about this technology. So I really think we have to both consider in some sense, the risks or the potential negative aspects, but we also have to take into consideration that not using the technology is also associated with major risks and potential social consequences. I think to conclude, I think it's also important it's not a question of either or. I mean, I don't know what the situation is in Spain. In Sweden, it has been a discussion right now. It's either books or using, say, iPads and computers and so on in education. And that is, of course, a false dichotomy. It's about both. We both need to learn how to use digital technology, and we need to learn how to do it without. And it's only when we know how to do both that we can critically use the technology in a positive way. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Luis, how we will do to make use of this technology for the best of society, for doing good for the society. Education has been always considered as improving quality of life. But now you have these tools that, as Fredrik says, will bring speed. But this speed is not coming from the society, it's companies that are putting the stress. So how we can balance these needs for having a better society?
Okay, I agree that we have here the question of balancing in between the speed and the caution. So be cautious, but at the same time not to be stopped. So the point is, I think, is that we have to go step by step. The important question is going step by step. It is clear that all those that at present are students in a few years will be working in a world where they will be surrounded by AI. So they need to learn how to co-work, to coexist with AI. That's clear, because AI is here to stay. There is no other option. So the question is, we have to start just providing this kind of skills, cooperating, the human AI interaction, the human AI cooperation, that's mandatory. The other question is how fast we introduce all the tools and make education an AI-dependent structure. That's a completely different situation. So we have to focus on what we really want from there. As an example, we have been, previous to COVID, there was another big paradigm shift in education that was Bologna, the Bologna model. The Bologna model was opening for everybody moving around Europe, but at the same time was related to a completely different question. Was the question of moving from the idea of the knowledge to the idea of competency, developing competencies. If we move now too fast to AI, maybe we go back to knowledge and not to competencies. So maybe we are fighting against the previous change. So maybe we enter in contradiction with ourselves. So we have to be careful of doing that. So the only question is being cautious and analyzing. We don't need 10 years to analyze the effect of a a specific measure, but we have to be sure not being in contradiction with our own previous decisions that are those. The question is, it is important to know that you will always work with a machine close to you, but you have to maintain the idea that you are on top of the machine, not the machine on top of you. The machine relies on your final decision that this is good or bad and on your critical thinking. If you lose that capacity, at the end, you will be the slave of the machine. And we don't want to be the slave of the machine. Those are the worst nightmares that we have is being the slave of the machine. So the only way of not being the slave of the machine is being on top of it. So knowing what is good, what is bad, what it serves for, and taking it under control. That's my idea.
So thank you very much. Let me take from you one point, and just to close. So if the man is the last responsible person, everything underlies on the responsibility of this person. So there is no machine responsible for anything. Will be always humans. And that will be related with the idea of unethical and legal issues. And that's very important, right? So if you choose the wrong tool to teach your students, it's yourself that you are taking the wrong tool. So if you use, I don't know, any one of the large language models, and that's wrong, it's yourself that you're putting that in the hands of your citizens. And that's the problem of decision makers at the governmental level or at school level. And that's one of the issues. So that's true. It's yourself that you should examine the technology before you put it in the hands of kids. Right? We have seen now the problems of giving too early mobile telephones to kids and adding on top of that Dale, and then you have kids 11, 12 years producing pornography. So who is responsible for that? So society should be acknowledgement of that these technologies are very strong, very powerful, and you need to know, you need to have a critical knowledge to use it. Kids are not, have not the maturity to do that. So I was part of the people who wrote the Spanish strategy for artificial intelligence and also the Catalan one. And one of the things that we asked and has not been answered is to promote all teachers in primary schools and secondary schools, maybe high schools, to have a master's degree on technologies with a specialty in AI. Without that, you will never get kids to learn to use appropriately the tools that are in front of us. So every year we delay this, we are losing a new generation.
In addition, considering that the more powerful the tool is, the more dangerous it is.
Of course.
So, and this is quite powerful, so that's the point.
So I believe that we are closing. I ask you a warm round of applause for our speakers.